It was a quiet, golden afternoon on the edge of the Sewanee River, where the dense forest gave way to a wide, silty bank. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and distant blossoms, and birds chirped lazily from the high canopy above. But beneath this peace, something small and fragile was trembling with fear. A young elephant calf, barely past its first year, wandered alone near the water's edge. Its tiny trunk swung helplessly from side to side to search the bushes, lifting its round, worried eyes to every rustle and shadow. It had lost sight of its mother, separated somehow from the herd that had moved upstream. Each step it took on the uneven ground was shaky, uncertain. Its legs, still unaccustomed to panic, trembled under its weight. A faint, guttural cry escaped its throat, carried on the warm breeze that skimmed the river's surface. No answer came, only the rush of the current and the rustle of leaves in the trees. Then, without warning, the muddy earth beneath its feet gave way. The calf slipped, first one foot, then another, and with a splash that startled the herons nearby, it plunged into the river. The cold hit like a wall. The water was fast and full of debris. The young elephant kicked its legs wildly, trying to find footing, but there was none. The river had a grip now, and it wasn't letting go. It screamed, a high, desperate trumpet that tore through the forest and echoed across the valley. The swirling current dragged the calf further from the bank, spinning it, pulling at its legs and back like unseen hands. Its tiny trunk flailed above the surface, trying to suck in air. Its mouth opened in a silent gasp, trying to call out again, but water rushed in, stinging and choking. There was no sign of its mother, only water, wild and endless, stretching on either side. Each second felt like an hour. Its lungs burned, its ears, so delicate and soft, slapped against the water's surface, shivering in terror. Muddied waves slapped into its eyes and mouth. Its belly felt swollen and heavy, filled with water. Every instinct screamed to fight, but its energy was nearly gone. Then, in one final, hopeless act, the calf lifted its trunk one last time, barely above the surface, and let out a thin, crackling cry. It was a call into the unknown. A last thread of hope cast into a world that, for a moment, seemed to have forgotten it. For a moment, the baby elephant seemed to lose consciousness. Before he could comprehend what was happening, the sudden pressure of a large wave sent his body spinning, sending him hurtling through the water. A mass of mud filled his throat, leaving him dangling in the void, his feet barely touching the bottom. A thick branch drifted past him, perhaps a hope of escape, but it was far away, and there was still no one around. The little elephant's body seemed to be sinking into the water one last time. His eyes were blurry, his strength waning. At that moment, Lucas Bennett was driving along a dusty, open-top convertible along a rural road just off the river's edge. His faithful dog, Bear, sat in the passenger seat. It was part of their daily routine, but there was something strange about the silence that day. Lucas heard a thin, trembling cry coming from the water. He braked abruptly, wrinkled his forehead, and looked around, his eyes scanning anxiously as he tried to find the source of the strange sound. Beard, beside him, was also startled. He lifted his head, his ears perked up. He looked at Lucas, growling softly. It was as if he too sensed something was wrong. Lucas quickly got out of the car and ran toward the riverbank where he could see the river. The water was murky and turbulent, powerful eddies swirling, its surface rising and falling as if breathing. He cried out in a deep voice, "Is anyone there?" But the only answer was the roar of the water. Bear suddenly barked angrily and, without thinking, began running toward the river. He stepped onto the muddy ground at the water's edge, and Lucas followed close behind. Bear's barks were a clear indication that he had seen something. As Lucas approached the shore, he couldn't believe his eyes. "My God, it's a baby elephant!" he cried. His heart was pounding. He took off his shoes without hesitation, but Bear was already in action. The faithful dog had jumped into the river and was swimming powerfully against the current. Near the surface, a tiny trunk was extending upward. The baby elephant was still struggling, but now it seemed to be using its last ounce of strength. With each rise to the surface, his eyes grew duller, his body sank deeper, and hope faded a little more with each passing second. But he didn't realize it. A savior, eyes shining with determination, was approaching him. Bear moved toward him, leaving a trail of splashing water behind him, drawing closer with each stroke. And the tiny elephant was being dragged toward the decisive moment of fate. Bear advanced with powerful strokes toward the elephant. As he neared the shore, the tiny body, barely moving in the dark water, became more clearly visible. Bear reached the baby elephant, neck deep in water, its trembling trunk reaching toward the sky. He carefully extended his mouth, as gentle as you can be, and grasped the little elephant's neck without harming it. He was careful not to sink his teeth, not to frighten it. At first, the baby elephant shrank in fear. He tried to understand the force surrounding him in the water. Instinctively, he thought it was an enemy. His eyes widened, his ears twitched. But then he realized it wasn't a claw or sharp teeth. It was a buffed, soft, warm touch. Not a threat, but a hug. It was as if a friendly hand had reached out to him from the water. Bear turned his head and began swimming against the current. Every movement was controlled and deliberate. He managed to keep the baby elephant's head above water, as if he had performed such a rescue many times before. Every stroke, every beat, echoed a hopeful rhythm in the water. The little elephant was no longer sinking. He could keep his eyes open and breathe. On the shore, Lucas sank to his knees. He didn't care if his clothes were stained with mud. His eyes were on Bear. His hands were outstretched, ready. His heart felt like it was about to burst, but a look of determination shone in his eyes. Bear was nearly exhausted by the last stroke, but he didn't give up. He was only a few meters away. When he finally reached the shore, Lucas lunged forward, extended both arms, and carefully lifted the little elephant from Bear's mouth. As if carrying a sacred relic, he carefully lifted it from the water and laid it on the wet earth. The little elephant was shivering. His entire body was soaked. Drops were still dripping from his ears and trunk. His breath was ragged, but his eyes were open now. Lucas quickly removed his coat and wrapped the fragile body in it. A sense of security spread through the warmth. Bear came to him, his tongue hanging out, panting, but his eyes still fixed on the little elephant. He watched intently as if asking, "Are you okay?" "We arrived just in time, my little friend," Lucas whispered. His voice was soft, sincere, and comforting. Then he leaned down, scooped up the baby elephant in his arms, and carefully placed him in the back seat of his blue convertible. He began gently drying him with a towel from the trunk. He gently dried the elephant's trunk, ears, legs, even its tiny tail. Each movement was a step toward the return of life. Bear sat in the front seat, occasionally turning his head and glancing back intently, as if checking, "Is my friend okay?" The little elephant was breathing more regularly now, his gaze calming. He looked safe and at peace under the blanket spread out over him. Lucas climbed behind the wheel and started the engine. The sun was now low, but with a resolve dawning within him, he set off for home. The decision was clear. He would not leave this baby alone. Lucas's small wooden house sat at the edge of the forest, nestled in the heart of a lush green hill surrounded by gentle slopes. This corner of nature, filled with the sound of birds, was no longer just a home for a man and his dog. It was the new beginning of a miraculous escape. As soon as they entered, Lucas spread a thick, soft towel next to the fireplace. He carefully laid the baby elephant there. The warmth of the fire gradually reached its tiny body. Bear lay down beside the elephant. His eyes never left him. Like a guardian angel, he was alert, listening to his every breath, watching his every movement. Lucas went into the kitchen and prepared warm milk. He carefully placed the bottle in the elephant's mouth. His tiny trunk quivered as he reached for the bottle and instinctively began to suckle. Lucas gently stroked his forehead, whispering soothing voices. The fear in the little elephant's eyes was slowly giving way to softness and trust. His gaze softened with each touch. It was as if he realized he was no longer alone. The next morning, something surprising happened. While Lucas was working in the backyard, the baby elephant, taking advantage of the door being left ajar, slowly stood up. His first few steps were shaky and cautious, but he had succeeded. His eyes were filled with both wonder and pride. Lucas ran to her, his eyes shining brightly, though he struggled to hide his joy. "You're a warrior," he murmured. That day he gave her a name, Dottie. The tiny white markings on her back were so adorable that he couldn't even think of another name. And soon Dottie was following Bear. She curiously sniffed everything in the backyard, sometimes digging in the ground, sometimes looking up at the sky, listening to the birds. Bear patiently taught her about nature, how to smell, how to listen, what each sound meant. He explained it step by step. He was like a teacher. Every morning, Lucas would take them to a small park by the forest. The townspeople, seeing Dottie running in the green grass, imitating Bear, watched this strange yet charming duo with sweet smiles on their faces. Everyone had gotten used to it by now, the big black and the little elephant following behind, his curious eyes admiring everything. As the weather cooled, Dottie would sometimes curl up in Lucas's arms and slowly close her eyes. And the trio had become a strange but perfectly harmonious family. Bear no longer barked or sniffed suspiciously. He always lay close to Dottie, watching over her like a big brother. But Lucas knew this couldn't last forever. That wasn't where Dottie belonged. Every day she grew bigger and stronger, and the longing for her own kind was evident in her eyes. Lucas felt the day of parting slowly approach. So he studied the map of the Suwannee River, marking possible locations along the river. He noted the sightings of Dottie's mother. And then, that morning arrived. The sun was shining. Lucas loaded Bear and Dottie into the car. The road was silent. Dottie sat in the back seat as she was accustomed to, but this time her eyes weren't focused on the road. Her ears were constantly moving. It was as if she were trying to catch a sound, a feeling. Her instincts seemed to tell her something was approaching. Lucas gripped the steering wheel tighter. This road was not only the beginning of a quest, but also the beginning of a farewell. That day, when they reached the riverbank, the air held a familiar peace. Lucas parked the car under a large sycamore. When he opened the door, Dottie stepped out, a little hesitantly. A familiar yet exciting scent caught her nose. Bear was running around, sniffing intently. Lucas, on the other hand, scanned the trees with his eyes, searching for tracks in the ground. Everyone was silent, but anticipation was high in their hearts. And then, deep in the forest, a distinct shadow emerged from the silence. A large female elephant. Her posture was graceful, but there was something in her gaze. Her round eyes, filled with a mother's longing, sparkled with hope. She didn't run. She stood still, as if she were exactly where she was meant to be. Dottie paused for a moment. Her ears twitched. Her eyes widened. Then suddenly her body tensed, her trunk twitched, and she slowly stepped forward. Lucas held her breath. Bear was motionless, only her eyes watching Dottie. The baby elephant took a few steps, then suddenly began to run. She ran toward her mother, her seemingly clumsy yet graceful little body. She stopped in front of her mother. They looked at each other for a moment. There was a silent yet eternal recognition between them. Then Dottie bowed her head and gently leaned it against her mother's body. The female elephant stroked Dottie's head with her trembling trunk. Then, with an almost invisible touch, she licked her forehead, a sign of love and acceptance. Tears welled in Lucas's eyes. His heart clenched, but he was also filled with an indescribable joy. Bear let out a soft bark. It was like a farewell, an acknowledgement. Lucas looked down, then raised his head and smiled. "We did the right thing, Dottie," he whispered. Dottie turned and looked at him once more. Her eyes were filled with gratitude and farewell. Bear stepped toward her, then bowed his head. The two friends said their goodbyes in a moment of silence. Lucas waved his hand. "Live like a true jungle elephant, wild and free." His mother took a step forward. Then they began walking together into the dense forest. Their silhouettes slowly disappeared among the shady trees. First their footprints, then their bodies, and finally Dottie's little trunk disappeared behind the trees. Lucas and Bear returned silently to the car. The sun was gently shining on the river. The light glinting on the surface of the water seemed to touch the emotions coursing through them. In that moment, they felt the end of an era, a story of a friendship filled with love, hope, and boundless. Lucas looked up at the sky before starting the engine. He murmured quietly, "Goodbye, my little friend." And then he added, "Dear friends, thank you for following this emotional journey with us. Please don't forget to like this story and subscribe to our channel, because every friendship grows by sharing."